Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. I did get one question that I think is worth diving into. Producer Matt, you go ahead and put up Jacob's question from today. Jacob, UConn's offseason haul has been very underrated. Are they done? If you were to do a preseason top 25, where would they be? Well, Jacob, I appreciate the question, and I do appreciate your support. Jacob, a huge UConn supporter. But Jacob, I'll start by saying this. Last week, we updated the way too early top 25. I do have UConn at number 4 right now, behind behind Purdue, Michigan right now, and that's assuming Yaxel Lendenberg comes back, and St. John's. I do have UConn at number 4. But producer Matt, pop up the question again because I want to make sure I get this question right. Jacob asks, is UConn's haul the most underrated of the offseason? And to me, there is a very simple answer to that question. The answer, folks, is yes. And so let's go ahead and dive into UConn's offseason. And before we do, I do think context matters, okay? Because I think so many of us in the media, fans, people who love college basketball, we define a successful offseason by adding a million pieces, and more specifically, like 2 things. Did you get any big 5 stars? And more importantly, most importantly, how did you do in the transfer portal? And as we discussed on last Thursday night's show, some of these schools, let me even backtrack. What we discussed on last Thursday night's show is that history tells us there are 2 indicators of being an eventual national champion. Do you have NBA talent? That's obvious. But then 2, you have to return a certain number of players, right? Is that we get so caught up in the portal, and this team signed that guy, and that team signed that guy, and this team signed 7 guys who were this or that or the other thing. But historically, look at the last couple of years. Florida, they returned Walter Nolan. They returned all the big guys. They returned Will Richard from last year, end up winning a national championship. UConn, the year before, I said Walter Nolan, Walter Clayton, I apologize. Shout out Walter Nolan, though, who did not return to Texas A&M, ended up at Ole Miss. Now he's in the NFL somewhere. All right, so backtrack. UConn 2024, returned Donovan Clingan, returned Tristan Newton, returned, who was the other big name they returned? Alex Karabin was another big name. Returned Hassan Diarra. Ended up winning the national championship. 2023, they win the championship with Jordan Hawkins, Adama Sanogo, and Andre Jackson all back. So the bottom line is we spend so much time talking about the portal, but I bring it up because the teams that generally do well in college basketball are teams that return a bunch of players. And so I've said it a few times already. I will keep saying it. The offseason at a couple schools were going to be defined not by who they got out of the portal, but by who they were able to return. I thought that was the case at Purdue. I still think it's the case at Houston, depending on what happens at the Combine. I think it was the case at BYU. I think it was the case at Arkansas. And I think it was the case at UConn. And so to answer Jacob's question, do I think UConn had the most underrated offseason in all of college basketball? I do. And let me explain why. It's because I think realistically, they are one of only a handful of teams that had about 4 or 5 guys that they could, in theory, return, that returned essentially every single guy that they wanted. And so you look at UConn, they only signed 2 guys out of technically a 3rd one out of the portal. We'll talk about that in a minute. But what stands out to me about UConn, why it is so underrated, they had about 8 or 9 guys with decisions on, am I going pro, am I returning to college, and am I going to transfer? And I would say they are essentially the only team, maybe Arkansas would fit in this category, maybe BYU, maybe Purdue, but there aren't many, where they literally got back every guy they wanted and basically kicked to the curb every guy they didn't. So who did they get back? We've talked about it a lot, but it's worth reiterating. First of all, Alex Karabin comes back. And I know Alex Karabin struggled, and we talked about it when he decided to return. And I understand the non-UConn fans are going to tell me Alex Karabin stinks and he regressed and he this and he that and blah, 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 and this and that. Well, in a down year, Alex Karabin averaged 14 points on 35% three-point shooting and had a career high in rebounds and assists. That was in a down year. Now, I will admit, He did struggle at times. The three-point percentage was down. We've talked about it. I thought the roles were weird. I thought more importantly, he suffered a concussion early in the season, never really felt like the same guy to me. So he is back. I think he could have gone pro last year and been drafted. I don't know if he would have been this year, but I think he still probably would have been a second-round pick. Listen, I'm looking at all these mock drafts. There's a lot of kind of questionable guys that could be taken in the second round. I believe the kids call them sus. There's a lot of sus guys that could go in the second round. Alex Karaban, I think, would have been a second rounder if he had stayed in the draft. He decides to return. Beyond him, and we've talked about it, Solo Ball. I think Solo Ball, you talk about players that are potential national breakout players next year. I think Solo Ball is at the top of the list. 14 points per game, 41% three-point shooting, second team All Big East. He is coming back. Second team All Big East. He's going to be one of the most impressive players to return to college basketball next year. Beyond that, Terrace Reed, we've talked a lot about him. How about this? In just 19 minutes played per game this year, 9 points, 7 rebounds, and about almost 2 blocks per game. That's in 19 minutes per game. And I think part of the problem was he came in. There was a fourth-year player named Samson Johnson that I think Dan Hurley felt obligated to play minutes. But if you're averaging almost 10 points, 7 rebounds, and a block and a half per game in 19 minutes, let's extrapolate that out to 40 minutes per game. And I know he won't play 40 minutes, but that's about 20 points, 14 boards, and about 3 blocks per game, closer to 3.5 blocks per game. Terrace Reed, by the way, 24, 16 points, and I believe 24 points, 16 boards, and 6 blocks against Providence late. So you could see what he's capable of. So you talk about the guys that they are returning. You also, never forget, also have to factor in that they did go into the portal and get what they wanted. Silas Demery, point guard, Georgia, about 11.5 points per game. Malachi Smith, the guard from Dayton. He's a backup player, but I think he's going to play that Hassan Diarra role from a year ago perfectly. And I think he's going to be really, really, really good. By the way, while we're here, I should at least mention in passing, because I think, Jacob, part of the question was about what they did this offseason. Oh, by the way, I should mention, not only did they return everybody that they wanted, let's be honest, and I'll say this in the NIL era because I don't feel bad saying it, they also cut some dead weight. Aiden Mahaney had to go. I'm sorry, wasn't very good. I don't know if he was welcome back. Isaiah Abraham and Ahmad Noel, I think, could have been good in time. But I'll say this, I think Ahmad Noel is one of the most talented players that was on last year's roster. But he was hurt. There was issues with his dad. His dad was very vocal on social media. I think UConn was kind of fine to see him go. They would have loved to keep him. But when dad gets vocal on social media, that's something that UConn has no patience for. And what I find interesting is that for Jacob's question, apparently Dan Hurley isn't done, okay? Because on Saturday, they did add a portal commitment in Dwayne Karoma from Lemoyne, who averaged 11.7 boards, and oh, by the way, had 13 and 5 against UConn. And so this is an interesting thing to me, because and I'll explain why. Because I think we're seeing this across college basketball. Spoiler alert, I mentioned we're going to have a special guest, Reese Potter, who committed to Kentucky the other day. 7-footer from the mid-major ranks. He's kind of coming in as this backup 5-man, but he's from Lexington. He wants to play for Kentucky. The spoiler is that's our interview for our Tuesday night show. And so I only bring it up because this is what I think we're going to see in college hoops going forward, is the fact that you spend most of late March, early April retaining the guys you want to retain, and then also getting the star players out of the portal that you want. By the way, producer Matt, great job. UConn also has several high school players coming in. Braylon Mullins is the most high profile, Eric Reeby, Jacob Furphy. And then last week, they also added Jacob Ross, the brother of Jaden Ross, who I didn't even mention as a returnee. I'm all over the place on this UConn segment. I'm sorry. I'm still frazzled by Cooper Flagg and Nico Harrison, okay? But I just bring it up because when you talk about an offseason, one, I think it's been underrated because it wasn't adding 8 players in the portal. It wasn't every single day hearing about UConn being linked to a new guy. It was about UConn getting 3 freshmen that they really liked. They just added a 4th. It was about UConn very early in the spring. I remember I was at the Final Four when Solo Ball announced he was returning, when Terrace Reed announced he was returning, when Jalen Stewart announced he's returning, another player, by the way, that I didn't acknowledge earlier. So you return everybody that you want. It happens early. You get Silas Demery early in the process. And then from there, you're just adding depth pieces. And so do I think UConn's done? I don't, because I don't have the scholarship numbers in front of me. But remember, with this house settlement, everyone's focused on the house settlement and the NIL components to it. But remember, there is now a scholarship limit of up to 15 players. And so what I think a lot of schools are doing now, who are those veterans in the portal that just want to come in and be a part of something special, that want to be a part of UConn, that want to be a part of Kentucky, that want to be a part of UCLA, that want to be a part of Tennessee or Texas or whatever? We got our 8 or 9 core guys, but who are the guys that want to come in and will be a practice player, will be a guy that can step in? And I really like that UConn added 2 of those in recent days, the kid out of Lemoyne, and then also on top of it, Jaden Ross's younger brother, Jacob Ross. And so I do think this was a very underrated offseason because of the fact that you didn't have to add a lot of pieces, but again, you retained everybody you wanted. Let me go over that again really quick because I apologize. Alex Caravan, Solo Ball, Terrace Reed, Jalen Stewart, Jaden Ross. No disrespect, but you lost some dead weight off the back of the bench. You add 2 key transfers that are going to play a huge role in what you do. You have now added a couple freshmen, and you've recently added some really good practice players that I think under the right circumstances are going to be able to contribute, including, as I mentioned earlier, Dwayne Karoma, who was very good at Lemoyne last year, Lemoyne in the NEC.